Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to our weekly Thursday evening shir. The shir is Leiluy Nishmas, Daniella, Shaina, Aleha Hashalom, Bas Yehoshua, Falik Sheyichye, for Neshama should have an aliyah. Over these couple of weeks, we are studying some of the insights and significant elements into the Mitzvah of Svera Omer. Last week, we spoke about the fact that in articulating the mitzvah, the Torah refers to it as a mitzvah which begins Mimochras HaShabbos, from the day after. With the Sefira, the counting begins Mimochras HaShabbos, and in the Gemara, it's described how there were the Baitusim, the non-believers who believed only in the written Torah, not in the oral Torah, and they insisted that the words Mimochras HaShabbos be taken to mean that the count always begins from Sunday. And the Chachamim said, no, Mimochras HaShabbos means from the day after the first day of Pesach. And we discussed, at least from a spiritual perspective, what was the significance of this debate between the Chachamim and the Baitusim. This week, I want to talk about a different aspect of Sfiras Omer, one perhaps less typical, but one that should not be overlooked nonetheless. When we actually count Sfiras Omer, when we fulfill the mitzvah of counting the Omer, what we actually do, usually the way it's done, is that it's done when one davens Ma'ariv. So when the evening services are prayed, right after Shemona Esrei, right before Aleinu, over there the person will insert the mitzvah of Sfiras Omer. Unless, for whatever reason, the person is davening Ma'ariv too early, in that case they would wait to count the Omer until after it gets dark. But otherwise, if you're davening Ma'ariv after it's dark, if you're davening Ma'ariv, the evening services at a time when it is halachically correct to count Sfiras Omer, so the way it's done is that the mitzvah of Sfira, the mitzvah of counting, is inserted in the middle of the davening between Shemona Esrei and Aleinu. And here the commentaries talk about this. After all, there doesn't seem, at least on the surface, to be much of a connection between the mitzvah of davening Ma'ariv, and the mitzvah of counting Sfiras Omer. They seem like two, completely separate things that have just been somehow mixed together or locked in together somehow and combined. What is the significance? What is the reason? What is the meaning of the fact that the mitzvah is inserted, so to speak, in the middle of davening? Of course, at a point in davening where one may interrupt and mix in something else, but nevertheless, before the davening is over. It seems like these two things, there's a mitzvah to daven Ma'ariv, there's a mitzvah to count Sfiras Omer. It doesn't seem like there should be any preference. You can count before Ma'ariv if it's time, you can count after Ma'ariv, you can, and yet it was established, it was set up in such a way that the mitzvah of Sfiras Omer is inserted, so to speak, in the middle of the davening of Ma'ariv. Why? What's the meaning of this? Why combine these seemingly unrelated mitzvahs of davening and of counting Sfiras Omer? Now, just to be clear, I don't mean that it has to be fulfilled this way. It's not crucial to fulfill the mitzvah of Sfiras Omer by saying it in the middle of the Ma'ariv prayer. Again, one can fulfill their obligation by counting before Ma'ariv or after Ma'ariv, or even, if for whatever reason one is not davening Ma'ariv. In halacha, there is much discussion about the fact that women are not obligated, generally speaking, to daven Ma'ariv, and yet in many cases, women accepted upon themselves the obligation to count Sfiras Omer. So typically, a woman would count Sfiras Omer without it being connected in any way to davening. But yet, if for whatever reason, the woman is davening Ma'ariv, or for that matter, when a man when he davens Ma'ariv, the mitzvah of Sfira is always inserted in the middle of the tefillah. So there's obviously something unique. There's obviously a special connection between the mitzvah of davening and the mitzvah of counting the Omer. What is that connection? That's what I'd like to talk about now, at least for a couple of minutes. And I want to try to explain it on three levels, or from three angles. Number one, there's a bit of a halachic angle here. In general, if you ask a person, if I fulfill a mitzvah and I don't have kavanah, I don't have any intention while I do this mitzvah, I just do the mitzvah. Do I fulfill my obligation in fulfilling this mitzvah? If without kavanah, without any intention, Do I fulfill this mitzvah without kavanah? Yes or no? This is called in Talmudic language, in the academic world, this is called the discussion of mitzvahs tzrichos kavanah. Do mitzvahs need intent or not intent? If a person does a mitzvah by accident, right, or without intending to, is that considered a mitzvah? Yes or no? And there's many, many different examples of this. The bottom line halacha is, with regard to certain mitzvahs, we say, mitzvahs tzrichos kavanah. Mitzvahs tzrichos kavanah means the mitzvah needs intent. If you do the mitzvah, if you do the act of the mitzvah, and you don't have any intent, you're not conscious of what you're doing, you're not conscious of why you're doing it, you're not psychologically invested, you don't fulfill the mitzvah. Sometimes we say mitzvahs tzrichos kavanah. You have to know what you're doing. If you don't know what you're doing, you don't fulfill your obligation with this mitzvah. With regard to other mitzvahs, we say mitzvahs ain't tzrichos kavanah. Mitzvahs don't need kavanah. If you did the mitzvah, you did the mitzvah. Maybe you didn't realize you were doing the mitzvah. Maybe you weren't trying to do the mitzvah. Maybe you weren't interested in doing the mitzvah. Maybe Rahman al-Itzlan, you didn't even want to do the mitzvah. Doesn't matter. Sometimes we say, if you did a mitzvah, practically you did it, you did it. You fulfilled your obligation without kavanah. With regard to some mitzvahs, we say mitzvahs need kavanah. With regard to some mitzvahs, we say mitzvahs don't need kavanah. Very briefly, I want to give you an example of each. For example, there's a mitzvah to give tzedakah. Of course, a mitzvah to give tzedakah. The Gemara says, what if a person had absolutely no intention to give tzedakah? He wasn't interested, he didn't care, he was miserly, and he was not invested in the mitzvah of tzedakah. What happened, says the Gemara? He was walking around with a pocket full of change, and unbeknown to him, there was a hole in his pocket. And coins were falling out. He didn't know. He didn't realize the coins were falling out through his pocket, down his pants, and falling out on the floor. And not more than a couple of feet behind him was walking an individual who needed help, who needed financial help. And as he's walking, he finds these coins on the floor, and he takes the coins in such a way, he finds the coins in such a way that halachically he's allowed to keep them. He takes the coins, he buys food, he provides for himself, he provides for his family. The person who provided the money for this poor individual has no intention to do so. He didn't plan to give, he didn't even know that he lost the money. And when he finds out that he lost the money, he'll be upset that he lost it. And he had absolutely no intent to do the mitzvah of giving tzedakah and helping another person. And when he realizes that somebody else found the money, he'll be upset about it. He'll begrudge the money. And if you tell him, hey, don't worry about it. A poor person found the money and he was able to provide for his family. The guy who lost the money will be miserable about it. It's not my problem that that person needs money. Says the Gemara, the person fulfilled the mitzvah of tzedakah. The mitzvah of tzedakah, eino tzricha kavona. There's no need for kavona. The bottom line is you did the mitzvah. You gave the money. A poor man got the money. You fulfilled the mitzvah of tzedakah, mazel tov. That's an example of a mitzvah that does not need kavanah. What's an example of a mitzvah that does need kavanah? The mitzvah, for example, of saying Kriyas Shema every day. Once in the morning, once in the evening. There's a mitzvah to say Shema. How much of Shema do you have to say in order to fulfill the mitzvah? Also a discussion. What's the mitzvah? The mitzvah is to say Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad. The mitzvah is to say V'ahavtas Hashem Elokecha, at least the first paragraph of Shema. What if the mitzvah is to say the words, as the pasuk itself says, B'shach b'chov kamecha, when you go to sleep and when you wake up, in the evening and in the morning. What if a person said the words and had absolutely no intention? They were thinking about what they're going to eat for lunch or for dinner. They were distracted. They didn't pay attention at all to the fact that they were saying the words. Maybe they closed their eyes. Maybe they put their hands on top of their eyes. Maybe they said the words, but they were completely daydreaming. When they finish davening, they don't even remember saying those words. So actually, in this case, it says in halacha, you're not yotze. You don't fulfill your obligation. The mitzvah of saying Shema is an example of a mitzvah which needs kavanah. You need to have intent in order to fulfill the mitzvah. If you don't have intent, you don't fulfill the mitzvah. It's an example of a mitzvah. The mitzvah is to say the words, but in order to fulfill the mitzvah of saying the words, you need to know what you're saying, and you need to say it consciously, and you need to have the right intent. All right. So again, this is called mitzvahs. Some mitzvahs need kavanah, some mitzvahs don't need kavanah. There's actually a third type of mitzvah. This is a third type of mitzvah. The third type of mitzvah is where the mitzvah is the kavanah. The mitzvah doesn't just require kavanah. The mitzvah is the kavanah. The mitzvah is the intention. Sometimes in order to fulfill this mitzvah, you need to also articulate the mitzvah verbally. But the mitzvah isn't to say words. The mitzvah is to have a particular intent. As you have this intent, you're supposed to articulate it verbally. But the mitzvah is the kavanah. What's an example of this? Where the mitzvah itself is the kavanah? The mitzvah of davening. The mitzvah of davening is an interesting experiment. Stop an average Jew and ask them, is there a mitzvah to daven? Of course there's a mitzvah to daven. Is there a biblical mitzvah to daven? Of course. A mitzvah to pray? Absolutely. Of course there's a biblical mitzvah to pray. I pray 3 times a day. Is there a biblical mitzvah to pray 3 times a day? Not necessarily. So what is in essence really the mitzvah of prayer? From a biblical perspective, when you strip it down to its core, at the heart of it, what is the mitzvah of davening? What is the mitzvah of tefillah? What is the mitzvah of prayer? What is the mitzvah? Well, again, the Rambam articulates this the clearest of all. The Rambam says the biblical mitzvah is that if a Jew has a need, if a Jew has something in his life that he or she needs, the mitzvah is to turn to Hashem and say, Rabbeinu Shalom, help me. I need help. That's the mitzvah of davening. Yes, in doing so, in order to fulfill the mitzvah, one has to articulate the prayers verbally. But the mitzvah isn't to say words. The mitzvah is to ask Hashem for the things that I need in my mind and to articulate that verbally. You see, it's not the same as the mitzvah of Shema. The mitzvah of Shema is v'dibarta bam, to say the words at night and in the morning. Yes, in order to fulfill the mitzvah of saying the words, you also have to have intent. It's conditional. The mitzvah is to say the words. It requires intent. Mitzvah is tzrichas kavana. It requires intent in order to fulfill the obligation. But with davening, with prayer, the mitzvah isn't to say words. There's no such mitzvah. There's no such mitzvah to say words. The mitzvah is to talk to Hashem. The mitzvah is to unburden oneself and share with Hashem what it is that troubles us. That's the mitzvah. The mitzvah is the kavanah. And yes, one has to articulate this prayer. Halachically, one is obligated to articulate it verbally. So the mitzvah is the kavanah and the verbal part is the condition. In order to fulfill the mitzvah of kavanah satfilah, of the right intention, you have to articulate it. But inherently, the mitzvah is the relationship that takes place between a Jew and Hashem when he davens. It's important to remember this. I don't want to, my intent here, of course, is not chas v'shalom to give musar, but it's important to remember this when people daven. You know, many of us spend time every day davening, and there's a lot of teuchen, there's a lot of words we have to get through in the prayer. Sometimes the prayers are long. And we can get so wrapped up in getting through the prayers. We can get so wrapped up in saying the davening that we get obsessed with rattling off words and our minds are altogether elsewhere. Now, yes, of course, it's difficult to concentrate. It's difficult to concentrate for so much time, etc. Of course. But it's crucial to remember that inherently the act of davening is a conscious, psychological, and emotional gesture. That's what it is. The mitzvah of davening is for one to turn to Hashem and say, Rabbeinu Shalom, help me, this is what I need. If you're thinking it and you're not saying it, you're davening, you're just not davening properly because you're not saying it. If you're saying it and you're not thinking it, you're actually not davening. You're going through the modes, you're shuckling, right? You're maybe making noise, maybe you're moving your arms and your legs, and maybe you're swaying back and forth. But if there's no intent, if you're not consciously present, you're not engaged in prayer. With davening, the mitzvah itself is the kavanah. There's another example of this, where the mitzvah is the kavanah, where the mitzvah is the state. The mitzvah is the state of mind, which also has to be articulated verbally. And of course, you guessed it, this is the mitzvah of Svera Omer. When it comes to the mitzvah of Svera Omer, what's the mitzvah? The mitzvah is to count the days. Now, how do you count days? Not by saying words. There's no mitzvah to say words. The mitzvah is to say, to know, to count. Today is day 1, today is day 2, today is day 3, etc. Now, of course, this counting has to be articulated verbally. Yes. But the words are not the mitzvah. The state of mind, the consciousness is the mitzvah. Which is why if a person doesn't understand the words in Hebrew, they shouldn't count in Hebrew. They should count in a language that they understand. And if they count in a language they don't understand, they're not just not fulfilling their obligation, but they're not counting. If you don't know what Shloisha Esrei means, if you don't know that Shloisha Esrei means 13, and it's the 13th night of Svera, and you listen to somebody say, Hayoim Shloisha Asar Yoim, and you repeat, Hayoim Shloisha Asar Yoim, but you don't know what you're saying, you're not just not fulfilling your obligation, you're not really doing the mitzvah. Sefirat, Omer, and davening have that in common, where in both cases, the kavanah, the state of mind, the state of consciousness is the crux of the mitzvah. And in that sense, they represent those mitzvahs, that part of Torah, which is not ritualistic, which is not inherently something we have to do or something we have to go through. But it's the mitzvah itself is the state of mind and the spiritual standing in which the person is. That's point one. Point two. When we daven to Hashem, there's things we're asking Hashem for. What if Hashem doesn't give us what it is that we're asking for? Sometimes, for whatever reason, we don't get the desired answer, or at least not within the time frame that we wanted. It seems like we daven to Hashem, well, it doesn't see. We daven to Hashem, and of course, ultimately, in the end, Hashem is in control. Hashem may choose to grant us what we wish or not. What happens then? Well, we remain with that want. We remain with that desire. But hear me out. As far as the mitzvah of davening is concerned, we fulfilled the mitzvah. We fulfilled the mitzvah. The mitzvah is for a Jew to turn to Hashem and say, Rabbeinu Shalom, please help me. I need a bracha to be gesund. I need a bracha for nachas. I need a bracha for a shidduch. I need a bracha for success. I need you to help me. The mitzvah of davening is to humbly turn to Hashem and say, Rabbeinu Shalom, you're in control. I humbly submit and subject myself before you. Please, Rabbeinu Shalom, I need your help. What happens with that after we've said that is in Hashem's control. Hashem decides what to do with our prayers. Either way, the mitzvah of davening is fulfilled. You see, it seems like it's just a means to an end. It seems like it's just a means to getting a particular request. But it isn't really. The davening, as far as the mitzvah is concerned, is an end within itself. Whether we get what we daven for or whether we don't, either way, we fulfill the mitzvah of davening, provided, of course, that we daven to Hashem and ask for the things we need in the right way. In that sense, it's similar to Sefirat Omer as well. Sefirat Omer also seems like it's a means to an end. The whole thing seems like it's a journey. We're getting to Shavuos. We're counting the days. We're anticipating the time when we can get to this particular Yom Tov after 7 weeks, etc. What if a person, for whatever reason, Rahman al-Islam, doesn't make it through the whole Sefirat Omer? What if a person doesn't count the whole Sefirat Omer? What if, for whatever reason, Lo Yaleinu, the person doesn't make it through? When a Jew says, Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech ha'olam, blessed are you Hashem, asher kidshonu b'mitzvosov, who sanctified us with his mitzvahs and given us a mitzvah to count Sefirat Omer. And then he or she says, tonight is the 6th, 7th, 8th night of the Omer, whatever it is. On the surface, it seems like it's just a means to an end. We're just going through something in order to get to something else. No, says Hashem. No, says the Torah. You've just done a mitzvah. You've counted a day. You may feel like you're only doing this in order to get to something else. You may feel like you're only here in order to get there. You may feel like this is just a journey. No, says the Torah. Asher kitshonu b'mitzvosov v'tzivonu. This is the mitzvah of Svera. And in that sense, it's also similar to the mitzvah of davening, where when we daven so often, we're focused on what it is that we perceive is the objective of davening. What if davening itself is the objective? Doesn't seem that way on the surface, but sometimes it is. Sometimes Hashem doesn't give us what it is that we daven for, at least when we want it, and nevertheless the mitzvah of davening has been accomplished. That's the mitzvah. At the present moment, perhaps all I can do is ask Hashem, and the rest is in Hashem's hands. It's not a means to an end. The mitzvah is koiveya bracha la'atzmai. Each night of Sefirat Omer, we make a separate bracha, as long as we count consecutively. It's our way of saying each day turns into a mitzvah in its own right. I'll tell you why I think this point is so incredibly important. So many of us go through life waiting for the next thing. It's like we need to develop careers so that we can make money, so that we can enjoy ourselves, so that we can develop families, so that we can raise our children. Much of our lives is spent going from one thing to the next. We're trying to build and create something. We know we have to work hard in order to do it. We know we have to do and achieve and accomplish so much in order to finally get there. And what is it at the end that we're really working toward? What is it at the end that we're really gearing to? Retirement? Our pension plans, right? You know that old Jewish joke where the people were sitting around and they were talking about, when does life really begin? Conception? Does life begin at conception? Does life begin at birth? When does life begin? And somebody raises his hand and says, you know when life begins? When all of the children graduate and leave home. That's when life begins. That's what we're waiting for. Until then, we're just on a hamster's wheel going round and round trying to get somewhere. One of the most powerful lessons of Sefirat Omer is the Torah says, stop, stop. Today is a day. Maybe it's the 3rd, 4th, 5th day of the Omer. Stop and make a bracha. Sanctify the day. This day will never happen again, ever. It never was and it never will be. If you're gonna go through the whole day just waiting for tomorrow, then what's the point of today? So many people perceive their relationship with Hashem this way. I want to daven to Hashem so that Hashem will give me X, Y, Z. And if Hashem doesn't, for whatever godly reason, then what? Then your prayers were a waste? Chas v'shalom. perhaps the prayer is more powerful and more significant than what it is that you're praying for. The relationship with Hashem that's formed during the prayers, the spiritual awareness that you develop while you pray, that could be more important than whatever it is that you're davening for. And so it is once again with the mitzvah of Sefirat Omer. Sefirat Omer is here to teach us, at least on the most obvious level. Sefirat Omer is here to teach us to value time. It's a day. A day passes, a day goes. Tick, tock, tick, tock. What are you doing with the day? Never think of a block of time as just a means to an end. Hashem doesn't create things just in order to be able to get through them so that we can get through something else. If there was no purpose in today, Hashem would just create tomorrow. And so every day of Sefirat Omer, we make its own bracha in order to learn to value the time that we're in, not to see it as a means to an end. Last point. There's something else that we should think about when we talk about the mitzvah of davening. A person has a difficulty or a challenge in life. They're obligated, like we said before, biblically obligated, to turn to Hashem and ask Hashem to fill this particular need. Hashem, grant me health. Hashem, grant me success. Hashem, grant me nachas. Hashem, grant me whatever it is that I need and want. Okay. Let me ask you a question. The reality that I'm in right now, the stage of life that I'm in right now, where I have this particular need. Let's say I need to daven to Hashem for finances. Who created this situation in the first place? Who created this reality in the first place? Who put me here altogether? Of course, Hashem. People sometimes ask this question. So if Hashem made me poor, God forbid, why would I daven to be rich? If Hashem made me ill, lo yaleinu, Rahman al-Islam, may Hashem protect us, why would I daven to be healthy? If Hashem gave me a particular problem, why would I daven to Hashem that I be cured or that this problem be taken away from me? Surely there must be some divine reason why Hashem made it happen in the first place. And yet Hashem says, daven for it to change. Where's the logic in that? So what? Hashem creates the problem in order for us to daven for him to take away the problem? But if the problem is there, then surely Hashem created the problem for a reason. Why daven that it go away? Isn't it, don't we believe that it's bashert? Don't we believe that it's meant to be? If this is what Hashem did, then this is the way it's supposed to be. And yet we daven that Hashem should change it and do it differently. What if Hashem doesn't want to do it differently? What if Hashem wants it to be the way it is now? And I'm the one who doesn't want it to be the way it is now. I don't like it, but Hashem does. You know what we say in davening? There's an expression we use. Yehi Ratzon. Yehi Ratzon means, even if it isn't the will of Hashem, may it be the will of Hashem. Hashem says, but this is not what I want. And we turn to Hashem and say, change what you want. Change what you want. So want something else. In davening, we're trying to change the will of God. What kind of a chutzpah is that? Who do we think we are? To tell Hashem to run the world differently? And to tell Hashem, if you don't want the world to run differently, then please want something else. We're trying to change the world. We're trying to change God. No wonder the Jews are so chutzpahdik. What, you don't believe Hashem knows what he's doing when he runs the world? And yet the same Hashem who runs the world in a particular way turns to every Jew and says, if you don't like it, daven that I should do it differently, and daven that I should want to do it differently. What does that mean? Well, what it means is, without getting lost in the philosophy of it, what it means is that prayer is very powerful. What it means is that Hashem has empowered, by giving us the mitzvah of davening, Hashem has empowered us to change the reality if we don't like it. Not only has Hashem given us the power to do so, but Hashem has commanded us to use that power. Hashem tells a Jew, you're not weak. Hashem tells a Jew, you're not handicapped. Hashem tells a Jew, you're not a victim of circumstances. If you don't like what it is, the hand that's been dealt you, if you're not happy with what's going on and you feel it should and could be different, stand up and say, Ribono Shel Olam, I don't like it. Hashem says, I've given you that power. I haven't given you a guarantee that it'll work, at least not immediately. But sometimes it does. Because prayer really does have the power to create this type of change in reality. The day Hashem gave us the mitzvah to daven, when we want things to be different, that was the day he turned to every Jew and said, Hashem said, I'm going to create an imperfect world. And I want you, the Jew, to work every day, to do everything in your control and beyond to improve it and to make it better. You know, like that guy who complained to Hashem and said, Hashem, there are so many problems in this world, so much pain and suffering. God, I don't see you doing anything about it. And God says, really? Let me tell you what I did do about it. I put you in the world. I created you. And I gave you innovation, gifts, energy, charisma, talent, vision. And I gave you the greatest gift of all, time. And I put you here, says Hashem, because you can change the reality as you see it. You can change the reality even when you don't see how, if you refuse to accept it. And if you find yourself even in a situation where all you can do is daven, then by God, daven. And that can change the reality too. It's Hashem's way of telling us we're more powerful than we realize. And there again, of course, we run right into the mitzvah of Sefirat Omer, where what is the mitzvah? Hashem says you're going to count 49 days. And on the 50th day, your counting is going to create a Yom Tov. And it's going to be not Stama Yom Tov. It's going to be the Yom Tov we mark the celebration, the day Hashem gave the Torah to the Jews. You're going to count days, and your counting is going to create a Yom Tov. It's the only Yom Tov in the Torah that has no date. Because it doesn't. It doesn't inherently have to be celebrated on any particular date. It's not connected to a date. Shabbos is the 7th day. Pesach is the 15th day of Nisan. Sukkot is the 15th day of Tishrei. Rosh Hashanah is the 1st of Tishrei. Yom Kippur is the 10th of Tishrei. Even Tisha B'Av has a date. Everything has a date and a time. Shavuos doesn't. So when is Shavuos? When is this Yom Tov? The Yom Tov which is responsible for the entire Torah, everything. When does this Yom Tov happen? When the Jews make it happen. When they count 49 days. The 50th day is the Yom Tov. Hashem says, this Yom Tov, even I, Hashem, the Ribono Shel Olam, I'm not going to tell you when the Yom Tov is. I'm not going to decide. I'm not going to determine. Not even a date on the calendar is going to determine. You're going to count it and you're going to make it. And on that day, in a spiritual sense, we'll reenact the giving of the Torah all over again. And so there you have it, one more connection between the mitzvah of davening and the mitzvah of Sefirat Omer, where these two particular mitzvahs teach us the power that we have to change reality by force of the power, of course, that Hashem has given us, to create the reality of the world that Hashem has made, and to create the reality even of a Yom Tov like the Yom Tov of Shavuos. So in the end, it was, of course, specific. It was bedafka that Hashem specifically put the mitzvah, that the Chachamim put the mitzvah of Svera Omer in the middle of davening because of the nature of the deep connection between the two. Where number one, the mitzvah is primarily a psychological, conscious experience where the person davens to Hashem is conscious of the time. Number two, it's there to teach us that what we perceive as being means to an end, as being stages in order to get to something else, is given to us by Hashem for a reason. It's here to accomplish something at the time that it happens. And number three, of course, it's there to teach us the power that we have, what we can create through the mitzvahs that Hashem has given us. I'll conclude with a Hasidic story. They said there were two people who were once sitting and listening to the sound of the ticking of a clock. And they heard it, tick, tock, tick, tock. And they were both men, individuals of great spiritual status. And as they sat there and listened to the sound of the clock ticking, one began to cry and the other began to dance. So they turned to the person who was crying and they said, "Why are you crying?" And he said, "You hear that sound? You hear the sound of the clock ticking, tick, tock, tick. That's the sound of our life disappearing. That's the sound of the limited time that Hashem has given us. Go. That's the sound of opportunity as it drains out from the reality that Hashem has given us. We all have allotted amount of time. You hear a tick-tock, tick-tock, tick-tock. It's losing, it's disappearing. Oy gewalt. Every minute that goes by, there's what to cry over. There's what to mourn over. Nebuch, we lost a minute. And then they turn to the other person and he's listening to the same ticking, the same clock, and he's dancing. And they say to him, "What are you dancing about? What are you so excited?" He says, "Do you hear that sound? Tick, tock, tick. Do you hear it?" "Yeah." He says, "You know what that is? What is that?" Every moment, that's Hashem talking to us. That's Hashem telling us, "I've given you, I'm giving you, and I'm continuing to give you the greatest, most empowering tool of ever, time. Believe in yourself. Believe in Hashem. Go do something with it. Create, build, don't give up." For as long as we hear the ticking of the clock, Hashem continues to give us time on this earth to fulfill our godly mission that every one of us was put here to accomplish. The mitzvah of Svera Omer practically is fulfilled only 7 weeks out of the year. But the message is there to empower us, to inspire us every single day of every single year, of every single month. The sound, the counting of the days is here to remind us that the greatest gift of all is time. It's the greatest thing Hashem has given us. It's the biggest pity to waste. It's the only thing in life, the only thing that you can never get back is time. Every morning when we wake up and Hashem blesses us with another day, it carries within itself endless opportunity and endless optimism. The mitzvah of Svera Omer being put in the middle of davening, among other things, teaches us that we can use this time that Hashem has given us to create things that we ourselves perhaps are skeptical to believe in, if we only access it properly as Hashem wishes. On that note, I don't want to take too much time in this year. I want to wish you all a wonderful Shabbos and a wonderful month of Iyar. The month of Iyar, of course, is a month of healing. May Hashem heal all of us from whatever it is that we struggle with, and grant us all many brachas and simchas. And please, God, bless us with the greatest gift of all, which is many, many happy, healthy years, and the strength and the attitude, the right state of mind to use properly the time that Hashem has given us. Have a wonderful Shabbos.